All right, you guys, it is 2:30. Thank you so much for coming back from lunch. I know the live music and margaritas and what have you can be, a real draw. So we appreciate that you're taking time to be here. I am Z. I've had the great pleasure of organizing the panels happening in here today as well as yesterday. All of them will actually be available through the ATI website, the recordings, so definitely check those out for any that you missed. Thanks so much to Capital Factory for hosting us here, and thank you especially to ATI, Advanced Technology International, for sponsoring the sessions happening in the room here. If you guys don't know who ATI is, especially if you are a startup interested in the defense market, you should definitely get to know them. They are responsible for working with the government and distributing over $3 billion, distributing and managing the execution of $3 billion a year worth of non-dilutive capital that goes towards emerging defense companies, startups, non-traditional companies. So get to know them, the consortia that they have, the other transaction agreements, and other contracting mechanisms that they use. Without further ado, I want to hand it over to Justin and his fantastic panel to talk about not venture capital, not private equity, but other sources of funding for startups that you might not know as much about and probably should know about. So Justin, let me hand it over to you.
All right, testing. Okay. Yeah, so thanks, Lee, for the introduction, and thanks everyone to come to this room and listen to the esteemed panelists who I'm going to have introduce themselves here in a minute. But just by way of introduction, my name is Justin Yang. I'm the CEO and co-founder of DMV Bio, which is a consulting firm. We work with ATI as an executive liaison on 2 of the health tech programs. So those of you in the audience who are interested in working in the biotech, life science, health tech space, or biosecurity, come find me and Mike back there to talk about kind of ways to get funding for your startup. And I'm also an advisor for GHIC Global Home Investment, which is a venture firm as well. So I'll turn it over to the panel to introduce themselves and a little bit about where you are, your organization, and kind of your experience with finding, sourcing, and winning capital.
You bet. Thank you, Justin. Thank you, Z. My name is Matt Loudon. I run the Tech Connect division at ATI. Tech Connect is a 25-year technology scouting firm that ATI acquired about 3 years ago now. Historically, our focus was on scouting for corporate partners, for corporate clients across most sectors, and we worked with sources of innovation across all universities globally and national and federal labs, accelerators and incubators and the like. And just functionally, we ran and run a lot of technology challenges, prize programs, accelerator, cohort support, aligned with our industry customers. And then with ATI, it's a very good fit because they manage a multitude of other transaction authority vehicles with government customers with very many parallels to the corporate need space, which require rapid responses for emerging technologies. And so we can run scouting programs to feed dual-use technologies, private sector technologies over to the government as well. So we still run our legacy business with all of our corporate customers, and now we also support what we're doing there with ATI. So thank you.
Hey everyone, I guess I'm also Z, but not as known as Z. So my name is Ashley Zumwalt-Forbes. Really wonderful to be here. I am at the intersection of critical minerals and national security. So the weirder and more wonderful the transaction, like that's really where I'm focused. Historically started a nickel mining company in Australia, leveraging kind of oil and gas, high net worth capital, raised $75 million, flipped it to a private equity fund, went on a 2-year SPAC misadventure, but it ended up fine. But so many of us went down the SPAC road and have the battle scars to prove it. And then most recently, I was the U.S. Deputy Director for Batteries and Critical Materials. and deployed $16 billion into the critical material and battery supply chain. So $6 billion in grants, $10 billion in tax credits. And then I moved to Austin. So my family and I just moved here, but we're from Oklahoma. We were in Fort Worth before we moved to DC. And I'm focused on my family office now. So again, weirder and more wonderful the better. So I'm very excited to talk alternative strategies.
And I'm Walter Boyd. I'm a recovering academic, a tenured professor from UT Dallas, who has been on a almost 9-year sabbatical now, running companies that we spun out of the university. They haven't kicked me out yet. But we spun out a 3D printing company that we sold to a public SPAC turned company back in 2021, and had a really nice exit. It's been a little more challenging in the 3D printing space in the last few years with rising interest rates. But had some experience running the polymer business unit of a public company for a few years. Recently kind of came back to academia and turned around and spun another company called Pedigree Studios. We are gamifying the collegiate curriculum in Minecraft. So by the end of the decade, your kids and loved ones can hop into a video game and get college credit for experientially learning thermodynamics, organic synthetic chemistry, philosophy, macroecon, microecon, with folks all over the world in a hyper-competitive but friendly environment where we can study human behaviors in a digital domain and personalize learning for individuals. In a lot of traditional academia, it's very difficult to pace content to the really accelerated students and the really poor students. And in a video game, that next content, that next level, can be dynamically paced based on analytics and feedback. And so games provide a tremendous platform to do that. So to get here, we've leveraged many non-traditional sources. So here to talk about some of those. Early venture, early private equity is really expensive if you're a startup. Partnerships with universities, SBIRs, foundations, bootstrapping, deferred equity. There are lots of tricks in the book to get through a higher valuation, to minimize dilution, and especially in IP-heavy companies or ideas coming out of academia. The name of the game is burning down technical risk with someone else's money, so that when you really want to scale, the founders who are motivated have enough skin in the game to really work hard and get it over the goal line.
Amazing. We have an amazing cast of broad breadth, and I think like I'm gonna remember a couple of these and come back to y'all with some questions. But also, I also had on the other side, which was a failed SPAC experience, where
We've all had a SPAC experience.
failed SPAC experience where I think like it was like tail end of 2021, and the bubble had burst already. So I think. However, I have seen recently that the SPAC, there has been a couple SPACs that have come back. So I don't know, maybe changing of the times, we'll see. And yeah. So let me just, I'm gonna make this part of the conversation where I'm gonna down the entire crowd, deflate everyone for on the funding kind of situation that exists today. And then we're gonna bring them back up. The panelists will I'll be the villain here and just outline. I think everyone in the room knows we've had a protracted high interest rate environment that's made the cost of capital prohibitively high over the last few years. I mean, in essence, the Fed has done its job, which is decreasing kind of investment activity and spending. Just some statistics here pulled this morning. VC funds raised in 2024 $11.7 billion. As compared to in 2021, the total haul from VC firms was $30.8 billion. So a magnitude of $20 billion less that exists in the venture capital space. And a couple kind of figures here as we start looking at other sources of capital where, historically, what's driving this, a couple of factors, but I talked about the interest rates. The other one is, frankly, since 2022, capital markets have been up, right? The S&P and our own portfolios, if you've been invested in the last 2 years, we've had a really good economic cycle on the public market side. And one could argue public market fundraising is easier today than private sector investments, right? So, you should go ask any of the venture firms that are here today and ask them if, the S&P's been up close to 40% over the last 2 years. If the vintages in their funds and performance on their funds have beaten the S&P in the last 2 years. So it's a tough time for both investors as well as startups, and I think with this being said, I will also just call out that we're undergoing a structural shift in policy that we haven't seen in decades here in the United States. I think the earlier panel you were on, I think is really good and measured in the sense that they're reallocating capital from the public side to kind of increase efficiency as well as allow smaller new entrants into the marketplace, both on the health and defense side. So with that being said, I'm going to dive right in. We're undergoing obviously periods of austerity and cost cutting both on the public sector and the private sector side. What is your advice for each of y'all for startups and how they can navigate these changing tides and position their companies in a way that clears the message with anyone who's willing to fund?
Sure, I'll jump in, but I will, as we're talking about innovative commercialization, I'll change it a little bit then, as opposed to just funding. That's really where we focus our attention, and so it's the companies or the sources of innovation that we work with, such as the universities or labs or the spin-outs from those or the smaller companies. We really focus on how they engage with corporate partners, and that's what TechConnect's business, our business, has been structured around, simply because there's so many different tools to support the companies along the way, everything from strategic partnerships, obviously licensing engagements, variations of funding such as corporate venture or strategic funding support, or help with federal funding, which we see quite a bit through a lot of the companies we work with, and then move down the line to something like acquisition. But there's all these supportive programs that come with engaging with the corporates that we work with that are somewhat secondary: expansion of market, expansion of distribution, support, even protection of your IP, or help with regulatory issues. But the engagement with the corporates, for us, the advice is simply, strangely, it always comes back to just personal relationships with individuals. These people that we work with within the corporates, whether they're scouts or division leads within companies, they move. There's a cycle that's associated. They seem to change jobs, move around, but those relationships, we've seen a lot of successes where the original engagement that took place and the relationship that was built with somebody at J&J who's now over at P&G, the engagement and the opportunity moved with them. And so it seems old school and a bit cliche, but it really, for us, it always comes back to these one-on-one relationships that we build up with these corporate partners.
Yeah, so just real quickly on titles that the audience can look for: corporate development, search and evaluation, people to network with.
Yeah, some of that is, and obviously there's corporate venture as well, but then we end up with a lot of just business units. That's where it gets a little fuzzy. What is their title? They have a technical problem that they need solved, and that just leads them down the road and to some sort of action. And again, that tool belt of the types of actions they can take is just so much broader than traditional venture. Many of the technologies we work with just are not venturable. They just don't fit in that high growth rate. They may be longer term development or deep tech type technologies that just wouldn't be a fit. But the titles are just, it really comes back to who's looking at that time. And so anytime any of these tech challenges that you see out there, prize competitions, any of those are really of high value because of those opportunities for relationships, and obviously any regional accelerator or incubator such as what you see here in Capital?
Love that advice. Love that advice. I would also encourage you to really focus, particularly in this environment, on near-term cash flow. I think it is great to have this enormous strategy of you're going to tackle all the way from X all the way to Z. But maybe that doesn't have to be your first step. My entire world is basically not venturable. And if you look at critical minerals, for example, if you look at where the industry needs to go long term, it is that vertical integration. It's a player owning the entire chain. But that's not where we start. Where we start, particularly now, is you get one piece of the chain up and you start making money. And then with that money, you're able to extend down the chain and either have that vertical integration or synthetic vertical integration. Oftentimes you see with investors, they get a little gun shy if you have interdependencies across multiple projects in your portfolio, and it ultimately increases risk and therefore increases the anticipated returns. And oftentimes, particularly in these challenging sectors, and where public markets have been ignoring the last 2 weeks, which I hope everyone has, but you can't really promise that you're going to deliver those increased returns. And so you need to inevitably reduce the risk profile of your business. I like cash flowing businesses, and those inevitably are easier to fundraise for.
And I think some of my advice is maybe a little more on the operational side. Contractors can be fractionalized. Employees are quanta. You hire someone and you've got to pay for them and pay benefits. And if you're large enough where a few people here and there doesn't matter, there's a different strategy. But when you're getting started and really managing cash, like in today's world, it's really important that you hire. If you're in the 1 to 100 people, you probably can't afford every specialist you need to be successful. So how do you manage money to get the team in place? You need critical expertise. There are a lot of federal employees right now out looking for jobs, a tremendous skill set. Be wary. There's great talent, but is that talent that's going to be useful over the time frame that you need them, or can you overpay them for 100 hours of work and be done? And you want to build companies, you want to create jobs, you want to create employees, but you also need to survive. And so, especially for startup companies, leverage non-dilutive capital, burn down technical risk, find access to specialists, even if it's above market rate for a fractionalized interaction, and really create the demand for the employees that you need. And I think especially right now, growing carefully is probably one of the best things you can do as a startup. And any kind of crisis is danger and an opportunity. And I think there's a tremendous opportunity here to get access to talent. And make sure as you're doing that, do it carefully so you can sustain whatever ebbs and flows in interest rates, cash flows, government funding, federal funding, defense cuts, might be on the horizon. But be positioned with the intellectual capital to really win in a market. And a lot of startups like to explore everything, be good at everything. I'm a software tech stack that can do X, Y, Z, A, B, C. No, don't do that. Be the best in the world at something. As a startup, you're not taken seriously if your competitor is NVIDIA, or your competitor is Meta, or your competitor is Microsoft. Find a niche that you can own, do that well, and then build from there. And if you want to become the next Amazon, start selling books, or start selling tweets, whatever you're doing. But don't go for the whole pie right at the beginning. And I think investors then take you more seriously. And then there are a lot of non-traditional investors, passionate investors, mission-based investors, investors that have had a disease or sickness in the family that want to support something. If you're in biotech or semiconductor companies that have a specific need that they can't do, find those little niches that are too small for VC backing, get really good at it, start making money, and then build. And that's a great strategy to minimize dilution and have a piece of the pie when you get to an exit.
That's really interesting, and I just click on kind of like when you're going out and trying to work with like a business developer at a large corporate or or organization, I always think in my mind it's a 2-year cycle for that individual before they move on, because business developers always, you know, move from position to position. So, but as Matt, going back to what you were saying, it's a relationship business, because ultimately they may be at this company today, but they'll be a director at another company tomorrow that will probably be in the same sector as you, and it's great to have this long-lasting relationship where you can do multiple deals over periods of time. So going into a more kind of, I know the audience is broad in terms of kind of different tech, deep tech, biotech, you know, health tech, engineering. If you were to build a company today and, you know, you don't have access to VC and you don't have, you know, yes, we know about the SBIRs, yes, we know about broad agency announcements. Where are you going to go find funding? Where would you go specifically to find funding today that isn't, you know, quote unquote more of the traditional routes? You have to build in your sector.
Yeah, my sector. Well, all right. If I'm picking a sector, I guess.
ATI. You would go to ATI.
I would pretty. Yeah, I was about to say. I went to the place I thought. I would go to ATI. But it was. I do think that you know, we still do have a very strong federal funding set of programs, whether it is SBIR, which, you know, was rapid in comparison to the FAR, but then something like an OTA, which is really a powerful vehicle to support emerging technologies. So like you said, I know the routes and engagement with the federal side that can go in parallel with corporates. You know, back to ATI, as he mentioned, it was, they fund a little over $3 billion a year. I'll market that a little different, a little under $5 billion a year to bump it up. All of SBIR combined is about, across all federal agencies, is just over $4 billion a year. So ATI alone, through all of its vehicles, is funding more annually than all of SBIR combined across most every sector. And that's just for the country, this is a powerful source to engage with. This doesn't really answer your question, but it's where, you know, it's the best fit that we have in addition to what I said earlier in the alignment with corporates, because I just do think corporates have such a route, an expansive route of support that's possible for companies as they're coming up. So with a non-dilutive edge, just like OTs represent.
So I can go really outside the box here. It's again, I'm a critical minerals person, but you can adopt this to really anything hard tech. If you look at the analog of the mining business, it's really shaped like a barbell. There are the huge players like your BHPs, your Rios, and then there are these tiny players. There's really a complete lack of private capital in that industry. And so if you're looking at an environment where you don't have a tremendous amount of VC available, like where am I going to get this money to go start deploying into a critical minerals project? The Australians and the Canadians have a really well advanced environment of effectively raising venture funding on public markets. It's TSXV, it's ASX. Those investors are much more comfortable with taking that larger amount of risk in very early stage companies. And it's because they don't have these private funds like we have very deeply here in the US. The other option, if you don't feel like, you know, going and becoming a small public company, I know we've talked a lot about it today, but it's really the strategics. So, you know, not the VCs, PEs of the world, but going to the big guy, whoever that is in your industry, and to your point, saying, I can solve the problem for you. And really being able to sell exactly why you're the solution to that problem, and being able to back your way into funding that way. So it really is just how creative can you get? Like, what is your risk tolerance? it doesn't have to be the same kind of VC PE model.
Yeah, I was going to talk on corporate strategics as well. You know, a lot of times if you're coming out of academia, I'm a professor, I know a lot of professors, right? We're arrogant, we think the world of ourselves and our research. I got a PhD, so I'm the expert in the world in this thing. Guess what? That means you're the only person in the world that cares about that thing. So if you sit here and talk about it, no one else cares. Your mom and your advisor read your thesis, and that's it. But we do have this really unique perspective that looks at problems in a different way because we've gotten so deep in a certain area. And often that perspective can be really useful to a company and a corporate strategic. So get yourself in a position to talk with them and then listen, don't talk. The more time you talk when you're with a BD person at a Fortune 1000 company, the less well that meeting is going. You know, they let you in because they think you've got some expertise that they might be lacking. Find out what that is, listen what it is. Don't tell them about your crazy tech solution, they probably don't care. But there might be elements of what you're good at that solve a problem that they have. And if you can understand that problem, it might be really easy for you to solve it. You know, you might be building an entire Rube Goldberg device, and all they need is the mousetrap at the very end. And they can't even see it from where they are, right? They say that you know, if you're good, you can hit a target. If you're great, you can hit a target no one else can see, or no one else can hit. And if you're a genius, you hit a target no one else can see. And so if you've got that expertise that big companies don't know how to get there, it might not be that hard for you, but it's hard for them. Put yourself in a position to be that problem solver, listen to what they want, give that to them. If it doesn't align with your long-term vision, don't do it, say no. Right? A lot of startups will do anything for capital, and then all of a sudden you're down this rabbit hole where you look back up and your vision is gone. You've wasted all this money, you've petered it away. But put yourself in positions where you can say no, take on orthogonal jobs that are adjacent to your critical path, right? Nothing's exactly what you want to do, but a lot of things get you non-dilutive capital, resources, people, expertise, and the more you can build toward your vision on someone else's money without facing dilution, the easier you can get to a point where you do really well as a small business.
Yeah, I mean, just to add to the audience, I mean, I think like at Walter, you know, I work on the ed tech side. Like we have Chan Zuckerberg that funds a lot in ed tech, like half their portfolios. And so look at the philanthropy organizations and kind of the mission space that they are in and the things that they care about that may exist. Lots of nonprofits with different types of both either direct investments or some other types of grants or vehicles. If you look at Europe, you know, I've just recently learned about this, but the Wellcome Trust has a Welcome Leaps program where it's kind of like a dark model that's sponsored by Wellcome, tackling really, really hard problems that exist, like impossible challenges in the biomedical space. Don't forget to look, you know, outside of the United States as well for funding sources, going back to Australia and Canada, kind of points there. Maybe just a question, because you all are very seasoned in the space, which is, you know, what are the kind of things you have to give up, you know, when it comes to just staying on the corporate VC or corporate, you know, business development standpoint. You know, there's this, you know, build to buy model, right? Like in a lot of the spaces where I'm going to build a company that's going to get acquired by one of these bigs, and you know, and from a big standpoint, they're looking at small businesses and innovators as the disruptive innovators that they should acquire, because you know they're maybe too bureaucratic, maybe they're too slow, maybe they're, you know, the risk profile is different from their standpoint. Like how do you go after that? You know, what are the kind of the things that you know, how does this relationship work in the space?
Sorry, I keep thinking that your mom read your thesis. It makes me a little sad, but anyway, so with the corporates,
My advisor did it.
That's very nice of her. The corporates, you know, obviously if you need to go fast and you're disruptive, it could slow you a bit. And the other is almost always you're, back to the professor analogy, you're going to be slightly misaligned, and which is fine. You just have to. It's very, very rarely a perfect puzzle piece, and so you have to be in a position to say, okay, we're going to now redirect, and which is, again, that's wonderful if you have that kind of strategic partnership with the corporate and they're able to go in that direction. But it does, you know, it can send you down a slightly different path. But if the end result is something of value, that's wonderful. That happens, you know, with OTs or SBIRs or what have you. You can diverge away. But at least with the corporate, you're in face-to-face engagement. Even if it may slow down something that could have been running faster, if you happen to be more of on a venture route. So.
You might also just marry yourself to one partner. So you might inherently limit your addressable market. So, you know, it makes sense that you're decreasing the risk, getting capital up front, kind of tying yourself to that end user. But you're probably not going to be able to also sell that solution to their competitors, right? And so that's just something that you need to go in, eyes wide open, understanding what it's going to do, both for your business and to your business.
And for those of you in the defense space, DARPA can be a great source of funding. It's a lot of work, it's short timelines, but it's a fire hose of funding to solve a problem that you might not even understand, but framed in a way of something you can do. And so chasing, you know, non-dilutive equity like that can be really useful. DARPA has this thing for you founders, innovators, grant writers out here called Heilmeyer's Catechism. George Heilmeyer was a CTO at Texas Instruments. He ran DARPA for a little while, and he had a set of 9 questions. What are you trying to do today? Articulate your objectives with no jargon. If in 1 or 2 sentences, you heard about the elevator pitch maybe, you can't explain to someone why what you're doing is useful, you know, it's really hard for someone to give you money. And so find ways to tell your story in 30 seconds, in 2 or 3 minutes, in 5 minutes, in 10 minutes. Beyond that, no one cares. Or not until you've got a full data room and armies of lawyers poring over IP and business models and other things. But to get that foot in the door, if you can't be succinct about what you're doing, it's hard to get people that are less versed in your space to get excited about what you're doing. And so finding ways to abstract that story down to the core meat of it. You know, a lot of times you'll go on this rambling story of your value proposition, blah, blah, blah. No, at the end of the day, you have a customer willing to pay you money. Who is it? Why are they going to pay you and not your giant gorilla competitor? And if you can't get to that very quickly, it's hard for real venture, ATI, other companies to take you seriously. And if you don't know or can't get there, pick a small enough problem that no one else cares about, that no one else is an expert in, where it looks like you can make some money and get a start. But if you pick the grand problem that everyone knows and understands really well, they will say, absolutely not, you're never going to get there, go away. But if it's a niche enough problem, they might say, I like the space, I like the team, I don't know a lot about the problem, it looks like they might make some money, sure, I'll come along for the ride. And so it's all about scoping that problem as you're getting going. You know, investors, VCs want that giant TAM, that serviceable, addressable market, serviceable, attainable market, total addressable market. Hey, it's great to pivot into that, but it's awful to start in a giant SAM because it means you're filled with competitors that have more money, that have a head start, that have cash flows. And so find a way to limit your sandbox to guarantee that you win. And if you can scope that right up front by listening, you can live to fight another day, you can have a seat at the table and build from there.
Yeah, and oftentimes I think, so in the bio space, Walter, to take an analogy in that, is that like if you're developing a drug and an indication that's super big with a dominant player, a lot of the small to mid-cap pharma companies that are going to be like, it's too big of a market, we can't compete in this space. They really focus like on proving in a smaller market size or indication the drug's efficacy over existing standard of care, which then physicians would then prescribe, right? So just an analogy on that from on the biomedical side. To add on to Walter, what you said is that DARPA also has these seedling programs, right? Which is like under $1 million. DARPA PMs can basically say, I want to fund this out of their discretionary and they'll, of their programs. And that's really like, handshake, if you will. That's within their purview at DARPA. So just something for you to do there when you're networking in. I've seen a trend, Matt, maybe this is for you. I've seen a trend here because you call out prizes and you call out challenges. I've seen like yesterday Strat5, there was a Strat5 here where there was an in-person pitch and they picked the winner. I've seen a trend of government moving towards this kind of space, which is I credit it, I love it, because it's like one of the things is like, writing a proposal is a very high barrier to entry for people who do not know how to write proposals, right? But if you can make a pitch, if you can make a compelling argument, or if you can, explain clearly, like, entrepreneurs and founders, some of them are like, I've never written a grant before, I don't know what I'm doing, but I know how to give a presentation really well. We're seeing this move, right, towards this, where DIU even does it, right, and other government agencies are now doing like in-person pitches.
Yeah, I hope that the trend continues, because that's what we do. And everybody has, all the agencies have prize and competition authority now, well, for the last number of years. Some have not used it that much. We're a NASA Open Innovation Service provider. It's called NOISE is the contract, and many agencies they route different challenge and prize programs into NASA, and then basically do exactly that. You run a challenge program that then feeds the solution provider back to some sort of prize. Also very big from a foundation side, and we are seeing this more and more on the government side. We have just ran an experimental program that's finishing up called the Defense Business Accelerator that had, this was a microelectronics focused one where it was a prize program for $10 million, but it starts with a tech challenge, review, an assessment, and then selection. And with ATI, we run a number of prize programs as well, not to the large dollar standpoint. We have a $200,000 prize we're running in health, medical and health security right now. But part of that is to also just on-ramp solution providers aligned with those customers around a subset of topics. And so it's all about funneling and making those connections with that end customer or set of customers that are involved there. And so I do definitely see that. I mean, it is a bit of a chaotic time unless something changes, that would be a way for rapid engagement without full proposals and happen. So
I was on the opposite side of government funding. So the smallest check that I could write was $100 million. And so,
we're not, yeah.
Well, but so stick with me. So like once you get to that really capital intensive stage where like not obvious how you're gonna piece this thing together, like you're sweating at it, you gotta go raise all these different pieces to try to get a big facility up. There are some actually great government solutions, oftentimes at lower than market rates as well. So specifically, I think we might just put grants to one side, given there's a bit of a funding freeze at the moment, and we're just unsure kind of where those programs are going to go. But some really interesting debt programs would be Department of Energy has quite a broad LPO mandate. an enormous amount of capital, particularly if you're targeting some of the big energy challenges. That's lower than market rates, lower thresholds to getting those loans in place than you would traditionally see in private markets. They can also club up with normal banks, where enter a consortium and take some risk off the table. The other option that people don't really think about is EXIM, the U.S. Export-Import Bank. And that specifically really comes into play if you're using services out of the U.S., if you're off taking something to a U.S. business. So obviously very important in critical minerals, but it has much broader applications as well. They have a phenomenally large loan capability, and it's really under leveraged, I think, because the right opportunities aren't applying, and just kind of hitting the right threshold. So they're working on broadening their capabilities to tackle. So a lot of large check size things in the government as well.
And maybe one more comment. How many of you guys are in healthcare biotech? A few? Yeah, so there are a lot of foundations, philanthropic foundations, that have a lot of money, that care about very specific things. And so being aware of who they are in your space is important. For instance, in the Dallas area, Lida Hill Philanthropies has a lot of money that they are trying to pseudo-philanthropically give away. Lida is in her young 80s. She's still very active. And she said about 10 years ago, hey, I've got $1 billion and I want to invest it and give it away before I die. And she built a team and started investing in high-tech, biotechnology, cancer drugs, and hit on a couple really big cancer drugs. And now 10 years later, has more than $2 billion. And has said to her team, hey, speed up giving this away. I don't want it left when I pass away. And so their appetite for risk, for big ideas that can have an impact across Texas and then broaden to the world is very high. So if you've got a biotechnology, that's a great place to look. I think the way to engage with someone like that is with a small scoping proposal. Come to them not with the full answer, but hey, for 50K, I can work to understand exactly how you'd like me to solve this problem. I can work to understand who the key stakeholders are and who would have to buy in for me to do X. And then go look for millions or tens of millions of dollars to go do X. But if you come in cold with a tens of millions of dollars proposal to someone you've never talked with, at best, it's going to be, okay, we're interested, let's talk about it. And let's spend 6 months, 9 months developing this. But if you came in with a small proposal that said exactly what you wanted to do in your engagement with them, their time is valuable, their time's expensive. So have them pay you for that interaction. Do it succinctly, scope that to a month or two, and if they put a little bit of money in the game, a little skin in the game, they're a lot more likely to listen and give you feedback, and then that proposal that comes out is probably a lot more likely to be funded. It's the same with VCs, except they're not going to give you that early capital, that's crazy. But, right, a lot of them, on first pass, are either going to say no or slow play. They want to see that you're responsive, that you follow up. They'll give you little things to do. Well, keep in touch with me, once a month. Well, Lida Hill, L-Y-D-A Hill. She came out of the H.L. Hunt dynasty. H.L. Hunt was the richest man in America in the 1920s and 1930s. Passed away in the oil business. If you've seen the show Dallas with JR, right? That was loosely based on the Hunt family. The earlier real Hunt family was way more crazy even than the show. I encourage you to read about them sometime in your spare time. It's some fascinating stories of intrigue and oil money and others. But a lot of that has made its way into high levels of private philanthropy, whose goal is to go make the world a better place.
And I'll just add directly, just to move some back, with some of the freezes that have happened, we were partners with some companies that run some of the foundational prize competitions, and since some of the freezes and USAID backing off, there has been a flood of interest from the foundations in stepping up to try to address. And so this is all there's a response that's building right now, and so it is a unique time to engage there as well.
Yeah, we can spend another hour talking about like how you break into these high net worth family offices. I will say most of the time a tidbit here would be that they're usually managed wealth by capital allocators. Like for example, you might have a wealth manager at Morgan Stanley that will, you have to go talk to them and you have to kind of like essentially convince them that, this is good effort, and then like the billionaires or high net worth individuals will then, deploy through either a DAF, or donor advised fund, or some other types of, pools of capital that they have. For acronyms, Ashley, you mentioned XM Bank, so that's for the audience. Export Import Bank is the XM, stands for Export Import Bank. I think the threshold there is like 40% export of your product. You would then qualify for that.
Or import.
Or import.
XM.
So along those lines, you have the Development Finance Corporation in the United States. That was a spin out of USAID and OPIC. Those are debt type of solutions. A sweet spot would be if you have and they invest across all verticals: healthcare, food, water, consumer types of things, and that's mainly for building American businesses building internationally, right? So that's something for you all to be aware of. Okay, so I think I like the last panel. I'm gonna borrow their question, which is like, what kind of material you're consuming in terms of books, audiobooks? What are some things like how do people put themselves in your minds, and how you think, what gives you that edge, So, we can close it out with that. Like, what do you recommend the audience consume either reading or listening or watching?
Yeah, so I don't know if I'd recommend it, but I read a lot of science fiction, and because it's all coming true. I mean, and so there are a lot of science fiction short stories because they're just on that next that just kind of pushes it a little bit further, and then we see that's what's coming. We see the direction, and I'm not, like I said, it's not for everybody. I'm not saying I recommend it, but at one point in my life, I was a scientist, and I'm just drawn to always what's out there, and what are the potential technology paths that could explode from what we're working on now. And I mean, 5 years from now, it is science fiction what's coming. So, that's not.
Love that. Wish I had anything that cool to say. So when I said I am targeting critical minerals and national security, like I am so deep in the echo chamber that like that is what I do. That is what I read. That is who I talk to. I actually really like LinkedIn in terms of following folks who are very active in this space and what they're doing, what their businesses are doing. Also, I was in the government for a year, but with critical minerals specifically, it actually is really important where policy is heading. I would say probably more than most industries, and so right now I'm like absolutely obsessed with figuring out like where things are headed and how we're going to be tackling minerals diplomacy. Also just like a bare bones like Wall Street Journal junkie, so nothing too exciting this side, but I'm deep in the critical minerals pool.
I've got 5 recommendations ranging from practical to fun. So on the practical side, there's an author named Nassim Taleb who wrote a book called The Black Swan and Anti-Fragile. And it talks about the importance of rare events in shaping society. More than half the wealth in the world was made or destroyed on 10 discrete days in history. So let that sink in. We spend all this time playing the markets, doing things, and if you had that foresight to know on those 10 days what to do, you would be very, very wealthy. And so the premise is that, well, black swans exist, Well, if you've never seen one, you don't know, but as soon as you see one, you know. And so these black swans are rare events that are hard to predict. And if you can turn those into gray swans through analytics, you can maybe start to predict when they'll happen and react as a business. And doing that well is often better than the day-to-day. And he had a follow-up book called Anti-Fragile that talked about building systems that didn't have single points of failure. Moving on to some other maybe useful books, there's a book called Shoe Dog. It's about Phil Knight and how he started Nike. And if you're an entrepreneur, you should read it. You see Nike, it's this big global brand. How did they get there? You know, he was hucking plastics molded in waffle irons out of the back of his VW van for many, many years. And almost always dead. And you think, oh, Nike's this great $30 billion brand. You know, they were struggling, starving, you know, trying to sell shoes to athletes at Oregon State for many years until they got there. And then the Everything Store is about Jeff Bezos' story at Amazon and how that started. And so those are two books to maybe keep you humble as an entrepreneur. A lot of entrepreneurs came from very, very humble beginnings. Then there's a book called Why Generalists Triumph in a World of Specialists. And it's about this world that is forcing specialization, degrees, money, debt, and why having a broad understanding instead of a deep understanding can be very useful. And then finally, back to science fiction. My favorite author is a fellow named Neil Stephenson. And so he's written some incredible books that are sort of in that borderline dystopian or utopian, depending on your point of view, science fiction to some extreme and how that shapes society. And he's got some incredible books that have presaged the internet, or cryptography, or most recently some interactions with space and sort of the end of knowledge acquisition. So he's got some great books.
Yeah, I just have one that I've never been more patriotic about my life after reading Freedom's Forge, which is, you know, how the industrial base, you know, transformed the United States to win World War II. In it, for the people who have read it will know, it talks a lot about government contracts and procurement and how the history of that really changed during World War II to convert kind of the industry of America to mobilize and develop, you know, plane ships and all the automobile industry, you know, transforming into defense kind of posture. I think there's a lot of parallels out there. And then one other, and I want to open up for audience questions. One other tidbit for you all, having served 12 years in the federal government in senior level roles, is if you want someone in the federal government to care about what you're doing, you should try to get, you know, someone in your field or your friend to go join the federal government. I know right now there's a hiring freeze, but you want to get people that care about your specialty, your topic, to be in leadership positions in the government or leadership positions in various organizations. It's a long game, I get it, but this is what, like, you know, if you look at the effective altruist EA community, all day long, they're like, how do we get EA folks into DARPA? How do we get EA folks into ARPA-H? How do we get EA folks into positions of power to kind of effectively change, you know, direction of our field? So just putting it out there. Questions?
What was your book called?
Freedom's Forge.
Bergman was in funeral. I applaud your focus on cash flow when you opened up. It's the lifeblood. Now, what do you think is the chance of building a tiny consortium of corporates, right? Not having that single dependency, and they're very difficult to work with in one. Like, nobody wants to be the first one. So if you go to three, say, hey, we want to build this technology that you use with some other ones in your field. Why don't you put in $1 million, $500,000, something that's really maybe full board approval or something like that? Is that a chance, or is it? I'm trying to be very creative in financing. So.
Look, never say never, but oftentimes I find with strategic corporates is they're looking for you to solve their problem so that they're more competitive against everybody else in the industry. And so having that consortium approach, I think, is trickier. What could be, if you flip it on its head, a consortium of again, I used critical minerals, adapted to whatever it is you're doing, but whatever it is that you're producing that maybe an entire industry needs, you could get investment like from a consortium of those players, and we see it very often. For example, offtake prepays, royalties, streaming, like things like that, where you are getting cash from multiple parties. But if it's a strategic angle, I think tough to get from multiple.
The semiconductor industry has done a really good job of that with the SRC and the Semi Foundation. There are a lot of these non-government affiliated NGOs, nonprofits that have members paying dues, which are the big companies in the space. And their model is a pre-competitive shared IP portfolio. And once someone joins, a lot of their competitors feel like they won't have access to some of that core IP that's developed. And so once there's critical mass, it's hard to back out. And so the SRC set dues as a fraction of top line. So companies were kind of paying relative to what they could. And then there were tiers for small businesses to come on very inexpensively to get access to some of that pre-competitive IP. And so you should look up what the SRC has done and Semitech and some of the semiconductor models, because I think they could, that led to the CHIPS Act and a lot of the funding there. You've got a very strong lobby that knows exactly what its corporate partners want, are helping fund academic research out of that pot of money, and have some shared early IP.
Yeah, and we've had customers that are consortia along this line. In energy, we've seen this a number of times. COSIA, which is a Canadian oil sands consortia that has the shared IP and invest. They do a lot of challenge prize scouting programs. We've run programs with consortia of utilities that are, because they're non-competitive, but they're all, but they're trying to solve similar problems. And another unique one that we work a lot in is smart cities. And so think of cities as a distributed set of test beds with everything from sensor issues to lighting and traffic and finance management to security. There's a huge number of urban air mobility. There's so many technology issues that are addressed within cities. And we're seeing gatherings of cities that have like issues to try to then go find best practice solutions for them to, because they're a buyer, to try to implement across the city. So there are variations of it that we see work. And even UT managed I don't know if it's still running, they managed advanced materials. It was a nanotech consortia of oil and gas companies that were there jointly investing and searching for certain solutions in the oil and gas industry. So absolutely happens. Coming in and trying to make it happen yourself could be challenging in some scenarios. I mean, that would be tough, but it absolutely, there are certain areas that they bind together quite well. So.
Thank you all so much. Kind of two questions. So building off of that, like local and state funding, like we can build relationships faster, like smaller amounts of money. We've gotten some small local like city grants that have helped us get off the ground. Like any experience with that? And then the second question is, as a young startup, especially in the hard tech space, finding paid pilots, I guess you kind of addressed it around one person's trying to be competitive. So how do you use policy maybe where they all have to be compliant with something that they would want to work on together? I don't know. I know those are two kind of disparate.
Yeah, I'll jump on some of the city ones because I mean every city, each city is a different mess, so to speak. They're all structured differently, but there are so many. There's city, county, and obviously state economic development initiatives. I moved down to Austin because Austin Energy, the utility here, had I don't think they still do it anymore, but they had an economic development fund that they would put into companies to help attract in. It was huge for us 15 years ago. And so there are creative, but they're creative models. And obviously the states are a little bit easier to find what they're going on. Texas just has their space program, initiative that they're funding and things like that. Sorry.
I mean, if you can enshrine a rule or law of the land that you uniquely have a proposition for, someone will pay you for it. It's hard to do, but the medical device industry's been great about doing that. Look at the cost of healthcare across the country. You've had very powerful lobbies mandating that doctors do things a certain way within bounds, and hospitals do things a certain way that have maintained premiums on reimbursement for Medicare and Medicaid. And so when you can spend the time to get into a regulated industry and meet that regulation, it's a great defensive strategy against your competitors. But it takes time and money and patience.
Do time for one more?
Yeah, one more question.
This is going to be more therapy. I'm going to ask for some free therapy. This morning I was reading alumni news from MIT, from the president's office, and MIT's decision to halt and freeze all hiring for non-essentials based on modeling that they did with what's about to happen. And so the letter was a lot like the book you recommended, that since World War II, universities have fueled innovation, industry, etc. And this is now under attack, so much of MIT's funding is up in the question mark. It's not the only university that will be experiencing it. As an academic, as a scientist, as someone who works deeply, I think is this a breakdown, or is this actually an opportunity for us to be more entrepreneurial in our thinking, with those of us who are embedded with institutions, to see this as a chance to voice them?
I can start as an academic. It's about time. We're bloated, right? Industries fire the bottom 10% every year, and there's a healthy turnover of ideas, of people, of work ethic. Academia has not had that liberty, for better or for worse, and a lot of times it's for better. There's huge value to tenure and freedom of ideas, freedom of thoughts, freedom of expression. This isn't an attack on that. It's an attack on a bureaucratic infrastructure that is very expensive for what it's delivering. And so I think this will bring a much needed transparency to universities, where in this case indirects are being spent. We've used them for a long time to shield what it's being spent on. We faculty spend a lot of time writing a grant. We live in a meritocracy per se, but then the university, public one, takes a third of that. Some private ones take half of that and redeploy that for whatever they want. Now, if all that becomes part of the meritocracy, I think the government is looking for more accountability in how IDC is spent. And so by limiting that to 15% instead of 150%, it's not. There are two arguments. One is, we're reducing that so there's less total money that NIH has. That's a different argument. But if it's we're restructuring this so that more of this funding falls under a meritocracy where program managers decide how it's spent, then that's more money for people thriving, innovating, really creating value of that money, and less that can kind of be hidden and squirreled away. And so I think those arguments get coupled together to say IDC and a cut to federal budgets. So we as academics, we as industry should separate those and say, no, we need to fund the NIH, we need to fund Pentagon, we need to fund DoD, but a level of transparency, a little bit more on how that's being spent could be a really good thing to help have some more accountability through that process. And if that's the result of this, over the next decade, it will be transformative for academia in a very, very good way.
I would say it's just not forever. Everything reverts to the mean. Like these full stoppages, we're not going to make any decisions, we're holding. We're just waiting for additional information. Like I actually am very encouraged by, once additional information starts to flow, some variables are filled in, people can start making better decisions, and ultimately, it will breed opportunities for us to be more entrepreneurial, right? And so I think right now it's a little bit of like let's see what happens from here. But certainly once we start getting more information, I think absolutely it'll breed opportunities. A lot of uncertainty.
Yeah, this is a lame answer, but yeah, I just don't know yet. I just don't. Man, I'm happy to, when jointly all go have therapy together in the bar and think about what's next. But there's so many layers of what's occurring that, I mean, I like disruptions in general, but I feel like we're so far away from reaching a steady state to know what the trajectory is yet that it's just hard to say this is what I think where it'll land. And so I do think I hope that it's not swinging to an extreme or somewhere. It'll steady state and we'll come to something that becomes more creative or that results in something positive. But as with all entrepreneurs in here, you got to be an optimist. So otherwise, you're not jumping off a cliff and trying to build something. So.
And if MIT doesn't want them, that's more for Texas. Lower cost of living, great people, better economy, great way to scale. So bring them in. Let's create the wealth here in Texas. We have great companies funding research. A lot of our UT Austin, UT Dallas, we don't rely on nearly as much federal funding as a ratio to corporate funding as some of the big Ivy League schools. And so great, let's get those brains here, solving problems, creating value, making a bigger pie, and things will take care of themselves.
Thank you.
All right, thank you guys so much. Appreciate it.